But wait, there's more. Days after writing that, I discovered that as of September 7th, over a month ago, the moderators themselves splained their term, mansplaining, in a thread created for the very purpose. Mind you, the thread was not an auxiliary of the forum rules, nor even in the same section of the forum as the forum rules, so no mansplaining is still not an explicitly stipulated forum rule or guideline. So using mansplaining as an excuse to block my comments remains arbitrary, but at least here it was addressed directly. Well, then this should be a conclusive answer as to why my comment was labeled such and disappeared, no? Certainly, similar to the variegated notions provided by the Urban Dictionary on the term, however, there was quite the hodgepodge of definition attempts. But I'm only noting here the definitions of mansplaining offered by the forum moderators, or by those who are, because not all commented, not the the other disparate attempts to define the term offered by forum regulars, you know, the ones who get moderator approval and have their posts present. I require an official definition. The first such attempt was in the original post of that thread, and was presented by moderator Sub Moore, who would define mansplaining as a perfect representation of the absurdity inherent in a privileged person, the man, falsely regarding an underprivileged person, the woman, as if their situations were equivalent. So, it's mansplaining if a position taken by a man reflects the notion, inherently absurd, that a man and a woman can share equivalent situations. Thus, asserting equality between men and women is mansplaining. Well, then I'm guilty and wouldn't have it any other way, and I did equate men and women's position regarding abortion in some fundamental ways. And you've got no good argument to show how those fundamental ways that all human beings share the same situation is somehow able to be brushed aside in favor of arbitrarily insisting on identifying distinctions of privilege. Air pollution affects all human beings, as did the Chernobyl disaster not discriminate, as does global warming, and when this planet is no longer habitable, your mansplaining charges will be scattered to the cosmic winds, whatever sex you are. And if you're not striving for a society of human beings, insisting instead on a society of women and men, I have to wonder at what sort of role you're really playing here, and what stake you have in maintaining the differences. Keep in mind that I was addressing abortion as a part of the human condition, not to establish some premise that no social privileges or inequality exists, but to provide perspective on the matter that concerns society as a whole. Your disinterested perspective is merely notable. But I did not only mention the universal component. I also continually asserted that denying access to abortion is directed primarily against women, pregnant women at that, but you know that the campaign against abortion is not just against pregnant women. If you're going to go on about misogyny, abortion protesters would be a good case in that point. The anti-abortion campaign is waged against women in general, particularly those who can bear children, and it hits poorer women harder. That's just the nature of the battlefront, and I stated the basic reality repeatedly, so no, in fact, on the other hand, I did not assert that men and women are in the equivalent situation, because I made recognition of that aspect of the field, openly, repeatedly, so I didn't mansplain, even if you take Submore's clunky attempt at a definition for mansplaining as the official definition. Plus, even if I hadn't taken pains to mention repeatedly that women are facing the struggle more directly, this is the rationalization for denying the posting of my comment, because I've mentioned that both women and men have an interest in abortion being accessible. That's so offensive. I mean, if it's really that simple, the offense of equating men and women as human beings and their situation. Offensive, just to consider, I know. You're going to have to explain that. you should make your warning clear, not just with the ill-defined phrase "no mansplaining," but spell it out. No equating of men and women, or your posts will be prevented. And just how is it offensive to present the argument that women and men share an equal interest in maintaining women's access to abortion? What stake do you have in men not being allowed to speak up on the matter? Surely you can handily demonstrate how my position was outright offensive to women. You were willing, you see, to privately tell me I'm mansplaining, but not to present my argument openly and then show how it was mansplaining, still whatever that actually means, and thus meriting of removal. More importantly, you fail to show how the position I presented is mistaken, and let others join in to say whether they agree or no with the position I articulated. No, you simply deleted my post because my argument was perhaps too strong for such a pitiful attempt at pigeonholing. Recognizing reality requires honesty, intellectual and otherwise. And yes, as a working person of the male persuasion, I would be mistaken in presuming an equivalence of situation between myself and a female millionaire, or a female national politician, or a popular female celebrity. But my error would be in presuming that I was the privileged one, while she was the underprivileged one, rather than the converse. Similarly, these Atheism Plus Forum The Management moderators are in the privileged position of being able to do as they see fit with my comments, just as I can be summarily silenced, since I am in the underprivileged position of being unable to do or say anything about it without their permission, at least on the forum. And so whatever defense they would erect to rationalize their suppression of my comment will necessarily be moderator-splaining. After all, there is an inherent absurdity in the proposition that the privileged person, the moderator, falsely regards the underprivileged person, me, the forum participant, as if our situations were equivalent. Clearly, they're not. What else? And this one, not surprisingly, was from major important moderator on a mission 5 herself, who we heard from earlier, who on this thread likened mansplaining to white-splaining and age-splaining, which would be old people explaining something to younger people, or to toddlers, toddlers explaining something, among other splainings. Mansplaining for On a Mission 5 is: the person doing the splaining believes they have the only right opinion because privilege, and the person they are speaking with needs correcting because lack of same privilege. And that's her formula. As indicated, I did attempt to correct whoever, male or female, or asexual, or polysexual, was asserting that male allies should shut up and merely help women look super important. And I don't know for certain, any more than they do, whether or not those supporting the position in that thread are men or women. Although in this case, the original poster is declaredly a male. So my rejection of his claim technically cannot be presumed an example of a privileged man arguing against a lack of woman, but rather against another privilege. So the whole privilege delineation goes right out the virtual window. But further questions arise. 1. Are these mansplainers claiming openly that they have the only right position because they're privileged? I.e. actually stating explicitly, well, I'm privileged and you need correcting because you're lacking my privileges. That's how On a Mission 5's major important definition reads, or can read, and while bandying about vague terms like mansplaining and privilege, clarity is not her strong suit. But I'll argue against the stronger interpretation. How do you determine that someone who considers their opinion to be the only right one does so because of their privilege? You just know, right? You can feel it. Privilege. Thick in the air. Obviously, two underprivileged women who disagree, underprivileged, middle-class Western white girls arguing as they step over a privileged, homeless, black, Latino, crippled man on the street on their way to the nail salon aren't arguing due to privilege. Clearly, since they have what your colleague calls, well, since they're not privileged, they're underprivileged, and they have what your colleague calls an equivalent situation, at least regarding sex privilege. But perhaps one girl has blue dye in her hair, while the other has none. So one is still more privileged than the other. But let's just say they both have blue-dyed hair. For today. Tomorrow it will be orange. Since such a case exists, clearly it is possible for someone to hold strongly to a contention as against another, regardless of any delineation of privilege. They simply hold fast to the contention, period. Because perhaps they consider it sound reasoning? Period. They simply... Yes. So how does this get properly factored into your certitude about my mansplaining? Since you not only didn't know that I'm a man, and ignored that the position was taken against another man, you also couldn't possibly know if I were taking the position exclusively due to this amorphous, problematic privilege distinction. I may very well have been asserting the position I did because I thought it was correct. And I was. And not to assert my privilege as a man. What, to just speak? Whatever that is, and however that's supposed to factor into that exchange. Or perhaps I should say to assert my lack of privilege as a forum participant. And fundamentally, can a man ever correct a woman without being called a mansplainer due to the purported suspect involvement of privilege in every man's existence? If Omission 5's definition remains dominant, then we're no closer to knowing when this distorting privilege weighs in. Number 3, who doesn't argue for a position, at least in some cases, simply because they consider it the only right one, regardless of any other consideration, including privilege? This is sort of like people do just take strong stances on things. Humans do this, though perhaps you hadn't noticed, particularly on the internet, where race, sex, and whatever distinction you wish to impart privilege often simply cannot be entered into an equation because all you see is text. To contend otherwise is to presume, without evidence, arbitrarily, a priori, that all those you deem privileged, when you whimsically so deem, argue from a position of merely establishing their privilege rather than establishing their position. For instance, you could very well find a man strongly admonishing a woman for not getting it, that a woman should fear all men as Schrodinger's potential rapists, even calling the woman a rape enabler and rape apologist for not agreeing with him, not getting it. Ridiculous, isn't it? But a man could indeed insist on such a position against a woman as the only right position to take, trying to argue down the woman who holds the contrary positions that men should not all be viewed as potential rapists and that solipsistic paranoia about one another is pointless stupidity. So if the man contends that such a woman is a rape enabler, is that the man's privilege talking? Is that yet another example of mansplaining on his part to the purported rape-enabling woman? It's an argument right out of Feminism 101, is it not? That's what Elevator Girl says anyway. Or if someone has launched a boycott campaign against a person, can one take a side strongly simply because she or he believes the boycott campaign is wrong? Or must it be an oversimplistic matter of alignments delineated by this ever-so-precise term, privilege? Doesn't the matter discussed at hand supersede all considerations of the so-called privilege of those doing the discussing? Or conversing, as you would have it. Is it not simple-minded analysis that ignores all the bountiful assertions that comprise the aggregate constellation of human contentions in favor only of whether the contentions are made by privilege or lack of privilege? Does that insistence not lead instead necessarily to dismissing people's concerns on the shakiest of ground? And as you know, Elevator Girl doesn't like people's concerns to be dismissed. Or maybe just her own. Number 4. Given that the fulcrum of this definition of mansplaining is entirely upon whether one is deemed privileged or underprivileged, where do facts factor in to all these brilliantly precise privilege calculations? What if the privileged black, Latino, crippled, homeless man, typical of a man, interrupts one of those underprivileged, blue-haired, middle-class, Western white girls to take issue with her contention that 1 plus 1 equals 1.1? He's clearly privileged with respect to her, on the face of it, being male, and thus he could very well be making his counter-assertion of 1 plus 1 equals 2 because he feels entitled, as a privileged black, Latino, crippled, homeless man, to assert that she needs correcting. So this could be a case of mansplaining. No? At least according to Omission 5's iron-tight definition of mansplaining. But what if now the other underprivileged, blue-haired, middle-class, Western white girl takes his side? Or rather that he's taking her side, of course. And that the both of them, privileged and underprivileged, are asserting that 1 plus 1 equals 2 against the contention of 1 plus 1 equals 1.1 held by the first underprivileged, blue-haired, middle-class, Western white girl. Can he be mansplaining even with a woman next to him saying the same thing, but, you know, clearly from a position of lack of privilege? Well, if he merely talks at all as a privileged black, Latino, crippled, homeless man, of course, he could be mansplaining. All it takes, really. But does his being allied with a woman outweigh the fact that he'd be arguing against a woman? Does his being allied with a woman naturally underprivileged on a position abrogate the significance of his naturally privileged status as a man and lend his position credibility despite him being a privileged black, Latino, crippled, homeless man? Perhaps it would, yes, since the position of a privilege now aligns with the position of a lack of privilege, and lack of privilege is what counts. Well, I'll throw that one out. And I doubt seriously that any man who would post in that thread would have had their post removed and voice silenced if they had asserted the contention that, yes, men ought to shut up about abortion. Men are likely allowed to speak, so long as it's to say they agree with not being able to speak. So, in that case, either the man's so-called privilege would be abrogated by simply agreeing with the underprivileged Western white women dominating the moderation of that thread, or they're just wrong right along with them, and it's just a matter of ensuring the placketing up of the same ignorant position without allowing dissent. I'm thinking the latter. But further, what if the privileged black, Latino, crippled, homeless man were to ally instead with the underprivileged, blue-haired, middle-class, Western white girl's assertion that 1 plus 1 equals 1.1? Would this privilege still be abrogated if he's simply in alignment with whatever an underprivileged, blue-haired, middle-class, Western white girl has to say? That is, if an underprivileged is taking the same position with a privilege, does it matter at all if the otherwise mansplained position that he takes is incorrect? Or correct, for that matter. Or what if he simply takes sides with the underprivileged, blue-haired, middle-class white girl who associates herself with Atheism Plus? Does it matter if she's correct or no? Is it mansplaining either way? Or is privilege pretty much completely irrelevant to any determination of the factuality of an assertion? And by the way, I ask such questions, yes, hypothetically, to demonstrate how pathetic the rationalization for silencing me necessarily is, not because I'm actually wondering. I don't care how these concepts wobble about in the flaky semblance of argumentation that the Atheism Plus moderators would attempt to construct as a rebuttal, which, of course, they didn't, since they're privileged enough not to have to. At least not with their finger on the delete key. Besides, we've already heard from moderator on Omission 5 that men are better kept silent and out of the way rather than attempting to correct women and take over the conversation regarding the struggle for access to safe, quality, legal abortion. The fact that I was not taking the position of the original poster of that thread against the voice of male allies and against the interests of the movement as a whole could very well have been nothing less than the complete and utter male privilege on my part rearing its ugly head. But the positions that I took cannot be effectively countered simply due to that false and unverifiable charge. You actually need to make a counter-argument, or at the very least, you need to demonstrate without a shadow of a doubt how the most mature and constructive reaction to the position I articulated would be just the reaction taken, dismissive and automatic removal. And bandying about this ill-defined term mansplaining isn't gonna cut the mustard. Exposing the inherent absurdity in these lame attempts at a definition for mansplaining could go further, but all about it there, and mind you, I didn't bother going past further than page 2 of that thread, because if by page 2 you still haven't presented a conclusive definition of mansplaining that would effectively and categorically apply to my comments, I'm not going to hunt one down for you. It means that there is no such official rule or guideline present to justify the action taken, and thus the arbitrary nature of the suppression is that much more glaringly obvious. For sure, I did not argue for a united front and not silencing men that are willing to vocally support a woman's access to abortion on the grounds that men are just totes cool and that you ladies should just step aside and listen up, committing an equally stupid tactical error. In other words, I didn't make an argument from privilege, and you are utterly unable to prove that I was. So that definition doesn't apply either as explicative of why my comments can be adequately called mansplaining, much less justify their deletion. Actually, this moderator, this major important moderator on omission 5, continues her major important femsplaining on page 2, and it's worth noting, of the mansplaining thread, with a curious little major important dictation on the subject. Privileged groups do not have the right to control, dictate, or choose the language used by non-privileged groups. See, now it's not underprivileged here now, but non-privileged, which I can only assume is the lowliest of the low who have no privilege whatsoever. Like dear Muslima's lesbian, unemployed, handicapped, brain-damaged, dark-skinned, three-armed, blind, left-handed little sister. But surely this is splitting hairs, so privileged groups do not have the right to control, dictate, or choose. Really likes the power words, no? The language used by non-privileged groups to describe privileged states or behaviors. Attempts to do so are generally viewed, by her anyway, as attempts to reassert privilege. Ouch, that would be bad. And aren't meant kindly. Correct, on the forum they delete your posts or ban you for such offensiveness. If you are an ally and also privileged, please keep this in mind when telling those not in your privileged group who are speaking up for themselves what they should talk like in order to appeal to you. It's off-putting, to say it mildly. As an aside, this scientifically verifiable difference, by the way, between underprivileged and non-privileged, a distinction that scientists have labored for years through much trial and error to test carefully and make sure the terms of which are applied and measured correctly and precisely, subject, as ever, to independent lab tests and peer-review studies. I mean, other moderators agree, so peer-reviewed, right? Right, so this is more directly related to the rationalization for sinking my or anyone else's post into one of those Orwellian memory holes, as integral math would put it, but for the charge in this case of mansplaining. The assertion there is that she can call any man a mansplainer as she likes, or a rapist, or a patriarch, or a testosterone addict, or a masculinist, or a hairy chester, or an inferior male specimen, because men are privileged and she is underprivileged, or non-privileged, whichever. And thus she, as a non-privileged or underprivileged, whichever, woman is completely entitled to call you whatever language she prefers, because you, as a privileged Black, Latino, crippled, homeless man, are not allowed in any way to obstruct her use of language regarding your state or behavior as a privileged entity. And that sounds fair. Name call at will. She has declared that she has that privilege over men. And she shares that privilege over men along with Britney Spears, Margaret Thatcher, anti-choice women, Phyllis Schlafly, abusive mothers, female psychopaths, female murderers, you know, all women. You are not entitled to question her or any of them, to correct her or any of those, to interrupt her or any of those, regarding how she, or any of them, wishes to consider you and your behavior. No corrections allowed. Your privilege prevents you, in her book, which is quite easy. An easy book to read. You are not even entitled to speak, in some cases. The world according to On a Mission 5. And thus, bye-bye democracy, hello dictatorship of the so-called underprivileged, or non-privileged, whichever. In other words, the privileged forum, the management, felt it had the right to control, dictate, and choose the language that I, a non-privileged, or underprivileged, whichever, attempted participant happens to use. It's off-putting, to say mildly. Now, to mention outright hypocrisy, but just to put aside the moment that, for the moment, that privilege equals moderator, and entertain for a moment their notion of privilege equals men, I am, otherwise, an ally and also privileged. After all, just like Elevator Girl and most of the Western world, I'm not Muslima myself, either, which I'm sure we all appreciate, including Elevator Girl, who was very upset about privileged people not getting what, not getting what the underprivileged or non-privileged, whichever, endure in this world. And yet I do not hesitate to offer a correction to those who are mistaken, period. And especially on topics like abortion, where getting it right at this point is critical to women even having access at all, much less legal access, to safe, quality abortion services. And yes, I'll make that criticism to people even if they go whining off to consider themselves not in my privileged group, or even if they lamely equate advocacy for the silencing or suppression of male allies with speaking up for ourselves. No, silencing those around you does not make your voice more effective. It doesn't add anything to offset your poor quality reasoning. It just makes you dictatorial, domineering, needlessly preoccupied by the sex of the speaker, conspicuously divisive and foolish, and that is not your privilege when it comes to the battlefield itself. You neither hold that sort of sway nor ever will where the battle is taking place. However, I myself do not attempt to dictate what those not in my privileged group, whoever they ultimately are, should talk like as a response to my comments, requiring that anyone appeal to me personally or as a man, whatever that means, since I don't speak for all men and I consider that irrelevant to the point I'm making. But the Atheism Plus the management did dictate to me that I was mansplaining and thus not appealing enough to them. Now, appeal to reason is less salient in the Atheism Plus forum than appealing to underprivileged or non-privileged, whichever, or more correctly than appealing directly to the moderators and kissing ass. In other words, it's better to pander as a sycophant than simply to state a meaningful position, at least if you wish to participate. Lampooning yet more examples of these potential moderator rationalizations for suppressing my comment isn't necessary. There is no rationalization sufficient to transcend its nature as a rationalization, so why belabor the point further? As it so happens, however, most of the discussion about the term mansplaining in that thread involves forum moderators and regulars piling on to dismiss any criticism of the use of the term in a manner equal to what Matt Dillahunty just experienced on the Atheism Forum, Atheist Plus forum, himself when he merely tried to ask a question. Here's a comment by someone named Rum, obviously a man, privilege. It reads in the right column that he is a moderator. It reads in the column not that he is a moderator, but that he is a banned user, and rightly so. Notice how when Jadehawk quotes him, there is text present that wasn't in Rum's actual post. So some editing has been done somewhere. In any case, Rum states, its use, referring to mansplaining, is as much a stereotyping exercise as any other, irrespective of the power relationships involved. I don't do it, and I would be offended as a male if I was lumped in with those who do. I agree, and surprise, surprise, he got banned, and I got silenced. And that's precisely what will happen when privileged women who want to feel important and dominant insist on usurping the discussion on the Atheism Plus forum to make it all about them. At present, the idea of a genuinely united front in support of women's access to abortion, with men and women speaking out equally and welcomely, has been successfully kept out of the conversation of the struggle in favor of the proposition that men just shut up about it and get in line. Upheld rather demonstrably, or rather that they just get shut up about it by the moderators. And that's precisely how Atheism Plus is maintaining its political agenda, through otherwise neutralizing all dissenters. Well, guess what? I won't shut up about it. Nor will any other concerned and self-respecting man helping to keep the abortion access struggle alive. Not even if, due to your stupidity and egotism, you don't look as important and dominating in your estimation as do I or any other privilege in the process of making safe quality abortion services actually accessible to all women for all time. Neither women nor men need your dictatorship dictating the terms by which we fight in women's human interests. And we'll fight for them, even if we don't manage in the process to feel personally important or dominate the discussion to be all about us, or at all. And even if, and apparently we do, we have to conduct such activity entirely separately from the otherwise stifling Atheism Plus misleadership, which will inevitably just lag behind because it's not getting its way in the real world. Oh look, it's Matt Dillahunty. He supports Atheism Plus, so surely he gets it regarding male allies shutting up. Matt, tell men to just shut up about abortion.
And the fact that I do this live call-in show where I take calls from people I disagree with makes it kind of, some of the accusations about not wanting to engage with people who disagree, rather laughable. I love to engage with people I disagree with. It's one of the reasons why I've shifted to doing more formal debates, which, by the way, I'll take this second as the last thing I say for this video to promote the Texas Free Thought Convention, which is coming up here in Austin, Texas in October, the weekend of the 18th, 19th, 20th, 19th, 20th, 21st, something like that. You can go to TexasFreeThoughtConvention.com or .org, whatever. Google Texas Free Thought Convention, you'll find it. One of the things that I'm doing at this year's convention is a debate. The question is, should atheists, humanists, freethinkers support a right of abortion? And I'll be debating somebody, a fellow atheist, from the Secular Pro-Life organization. We'll see how that goes. I'm looking forward to it.
You're going to go up and debate? And no Atheism Plus woman will be there to dictate the terms of the conversation? Or dictate which language you can use? How patriarchal! Check your privilege, Matt! Then maybe our feminism ally, TruePooka, will tell men to shut up about abortion.
The fact that Ray Comfort would use the Holocaust, the abortion issue, and the Christian religion all rolled into one to raise money for his own interests, it's disgusting.
What? That's about Ray Comfort's 180 campaign against women being allowed to have an abortion. You can't talk about that. You're making it all about you. You're usurping the conversation. That ain't right. Okay, here's a debate on abortion. This lady's looking very important, ain't she? But she's just a moderator, so who's making the argument for abortion?
The issue before us is one of the most profound issues of moral concern that we face today. And I want to say I respect anyone who is willing to discuss this in a rational and dignified way. It's particularly important because, as we both believe and understand, lives are at stake here. Lives like the lives of Dr. Barnett Slepian, who, after returning home from synagogue, where he had attended a memorial service for his father, was making soup in his kitchen when he was shot through the spine with a high-powered rifle, while his son looked on helpless, the bullet barely missing his son's head. Lives like Dr. George Tiller, who was shot through the eye and killed as he served as an usher at his church, handing out church bulletins. To say that emotions don't run high in this discussion would be a profound misstatement. So this is a profound moral issue with the lives of people in the balance, and it deserves to be dealt with directly, honestly, and sensitively, and I hope that that's what we're going to do today.
That's James Croft, another privileged male. Shut up! No more mansplaining! You'd probably let anyone speak about abortion, even Atheism Plus's worst enemies. No, not Justicar! Shut up, shut up, shut up!
Unfortunately, in societies where we have people, all of whom have rights, you sometimes have a conflict in the primacy, whose rights or interests are more important than someone else's. And when they talk about this right to life thing, I fully grant it. Your unborn child has a right to life, I have a right to life, you have a right to life, we all have a right to life. Unfortunately, just like with swinging your arm, your right to swing your arm stops where my nose begins, so too does do we run into a conflict here. And it's kind of like this. I have a right to life, the same as anyone else, but if I'm dying and I need an organ transplant, no one can mandate anybody else to surrender one of their organs for my use for the next 50 or 60 years. If you happen to be generous and want to donate your kidney to me, greatly appreciate it, thank you very much, I'll love you forever. If you don't want to, and the consequence of that is I will happen to die, well, my right to remain alive doesn't overcome your rights of sovereignty over your own body, so that's just a shitty outcome for me. And this is an outcome that all of the rest of you accept too, because I notice that these pro-lifers, when they're talking about the right to life, aren't also proposing that there should be some right for someone to demand that another person be vivisected, an organ removed, and then that person can use it for their life. Well, the uterus is an organ, and if a mother-to-be, or a potential mother, would like to share her uterus with a fetus, with an unborn child, more power to you, many happy returns, blessings on your house. If she doesn't want to share her uterus with someone else, well, that's just unfortunate for that someone else. That someone else doesn't get to remain there and offset a person's sovereignty over their own body, their own internal organs. So the unborn child has to lose, even if that entails the unborn child dying. And if any of the pro-lifers out there disagree, when I see that you are advocating for a society where your organs can be harvested and removed from your body and put in someone else's body against your consent, I will have a lot more time to listen to your argument that a woman can be forced to share her uterus with an unborn child. I'm sorry, darling. I love you and I respect you, but I hate to inform you that I have now voted that you don't have the right to decide for yourself what risks you're willing to take. I'm gonna do that for you, okay? Because I know that you're just all hormonal and shit, and you ain't quite smart enough to know whether or not you would like this to be done. And since I know that you can't do it, you can't properly reason this out, I'm gonna make that decision for you. But don't you dare try to ask me if I would ever let anybody do that to me, because then I'm just going to say you're trying to exploit my emotions. While I'm exploiting my emotions about that unborn child that I'm saying is more important than you are, even though you can appreciate what I'm doing to you, and it can't. Alright, Pumpkin? Is that okay with you? Except they don't bother to ask, is that okay with you? You just declare by fiat. She's pregnant. She's now community property. So, when do you get to be community property? And if you're unwilling to submit to it, why should you expect that another person would be? Not all interests are equal, and in some contests, some people have to lose. I happen to vote for the fact that the person who loses in this particular contest is the one that can't appreciate what's being done to it. Which is conspicuously not the woman you're telling she's not entitled any longer to have a vote over what happens to her body. Because you decide, or someone decides. On your argument, it works like this. Okay, wherever you want to draw the line. Okay, you are completely in control of your body for the next however many weeks or months. But after that, I'm in control. I decide what happens inside you, not you. I own your fucking body, and you will take every risk, and you will follow my will, whether you like it or not. Because I'm interested in whatever your interests in, or whatever they happen to be. No, that just doesn't work. Or if it does, when do we get a vote on yours? On my proposition, one retains control, absolutely. That's what it means to be sovereign. You don't require anyone else's consent. You don't require anyone else's approval. You don't require anyone else's agreement. And no one can outvote you. No one can decide on your behalf over your objections what will happen. It's an absolute right. There aren't gradations here. Now, I'm just not comfortable with slavery. Maybe you are. You're welcome to it. But again, if you're going to start arguing that you have a right to decide for other people under whatever the circumstances what does and doesn't happen inside their bodies, fine. When do we get to start making the similar votes for what happens inside yours? When are you going to cede those rights to the community? Then put yourself in that situation and ask, would you still nevertheless accept that you have to just take it when other people decide what happens to you, no matter how strongly you feel otherwise? And you're unwilling to do that, I imagine, because apparently I'm just so fucking unique that I'm the only one who's willing to kill or die to prevent other people from fucking violating my body.
And that's just about one of the best and most well-articulated arguments for abortion access I've ever heard. From one of the biggest candidates for Atheism Plus Mansplaining Award in existence.
I'm just here because I think abortion is such a personal choice. I don't know why anyone would want to make it for somebody else.
I'm here because I support a woman's right to choose. I don't think that women can have full equality if they don't have the right to control their own bodies.
I think it's very important for men to support women's freedom and women's right to choose what they do with their bodies.
Love the signs, gents. Anyone want to, tell us why you're here, that sort of thing? No? That's cool.
For choice.
For choice. Yep. You want to speak up, and
Women's rights are human rights.
Women's rights are human rights, and you're just here because all the good-looking people support choice.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Say that I need to be saved. Say with me, the devil got his way. I want to know how when you are praying, when you are doomsdaying, how you think you know that someone is listening to what you are saying. So you think that you tell us how to live our lives, never questioning the source from which our moral code
right to life. Your rights to life. You don't care.
Say I need to hear the truth. The sales pitch of eternal life and eternal youth. All these blessings you are bestowing upon the one you say is all-knowing. Or are they really deserved? If you sending me where you say I am going. So you think that you can tell us how to live our lives, never questioning the source from which your moral code derives. You think that suffering is part of some great plan that's been devised. I wonder, I wonder, I wonder, I wonder, what will it take for you to start opening your eyes, to start questioning the bullshit everyone around you buys? You think it's setting up your business, what goes on between my thighs? I wonder, when we'll be rid of your eyes. So you think that you tell us how to live our lives, never questioning the source from which your moral code derives. You think that suffering is part of some great plan that's been devised. I wonder, I wonder, I wonder, I wonder, what will it take for you to start opening your eyes, to start questioning the bullshit everyone around you buys? Think it's setting up your business, what goes on between my thighs? I wonder, when we'll be rid of your eyes.
Boy, these conservatives are really something, aren't they? They're all in favor of the unborn. They will do anything for the unborn. But once you're born, you're on your own. Pro-life conservatives are obsessed with the fetus from conception to 9 months. After that, they don't want to know about you. They don't want to hear from you. No nothing. No neonatal care, no daycare, no Head Start, no school lunch, no food stamps, no welfare, no nothing. If you're pre-born, you're fine. If you're preschool, you're fucked. You're fucked. Conservatives don't give a shit about you until you reach military age. Then they think you are just fine, just what they've been looking for. Conservatives want live babies so they can raise them to be dead soldiers. Pro-life. Pro-life. These people aren't pro-life, they're killing doctors. What kind of pro-life is that? What, they'll do anything they can to save a fetus, but if it grows up to be a doctor, they just might have to kill it? They're not pro-life. You know what they are? They're anti-woman. Simple as it gets. Anti-woman. They don't like it. They don't like women. They believe a woman's primary role is to function as a broodmare for the state. Pro-life. You don't see many of these white anti-abortion women volunteering to have any black fetuses transplanted into their uteruses, do you? No, you don't see them adopting a whole lot of crack babies, do you? No, that might be something Christ would do. And you won't see a lot of these pro-life people dousing themselves in kerosene and lighting themselves on fire. You know, morally committed religious people in South Vietnam knew how to stage a goddamn demonstration, didn't they? Huh? They knew how to put on a fucking protest. Light yourself on fire! Come on, you moral crusaders, let's see a little smoke to match that fire in your belly. Here's another question I have. How come when it's us, it's an abortion, and when it's a chicken, it's an omelet? Are we so much better than chickens all of a sudden? When did this happen, that we passed chickens in goodness? Name 6 ways we're better than chickens. See, nobody can do it. You know why? Because chickens are decent people. You don't see chickens hanging around in drug gangs, do you? You don't see a chicken strapping some guy to a chair and hooking up his nuts to a car battery, do you? When's the last chicken you heard about came home from work and beat the shit out of his hand? Huh? Doesn't happen. Because chickens are decent people. Well, let's get back to this abortion shit. Now, is a fetus a human being? This seems to be the central question. Well, if a fetus is a human being, how come the census doesn't count them? If a fetus is a human being, how come when there's a miscarriage they don't have a funeral? If a fetus is a human being, how come people say we have 2 children and 1 on the way instead of saying we have 3 children? People say life begins at conception. I say life began about 1 billion years ago, and it's a continuous process. Continuous, just keeps rolling along. Rolling along. I say, you know something? Listen, you can go back further than that. What about the carbon atoms? Huh? Human life could not exist without carbon. So is it just possible that maybe we shouldn't be burning all this coal? Just looking for a little consistency here in these anti-abortion arguments. See, the really hardcore people will tell you life begins at fertilization. Fertilization when the sperm fertilizes the egg, which is usually a few moments after the man says, gee, honey, I was going to pull out, but the phone rang and it startled me. But even after the egg is fertilized, it's still 6 or 7 days before it reaches the uterus and pregnancy begins. And not every egg makes it that far. 80% of a woman's fertilized eggs are rinsed and flushed out of her body once a month during those delightful few days she has. They wind up on sanitary napkins, and yet they are fertilized eggs. So basically what these anti-abortion people are telling us is that any woman who's had more than 1 period is a serial killer. Consistency. Consistency. Hey. Now, speaking of consistency, Catholics, which I was until I reached the age of reason, Catholics and other Christians are against abortions, and they're against homosexuals. Well, who has less abortions than homosexuals? Leave these fucking people alone, for Christ's sakes. Here is an entire class of people guaranteed never to have an abortion. And the Catholics and Christians are just tossing them aside. You'd think they'd make natural allies. Go look for consistency in religion. And speaking of my friends the Catholics, when John Cardinal O'Connor of New York and some of these other cardinals and bishops have experienced their first pregnancies and their first labor pains and they've raised a couple of children on minimum wage, then I'll be glad to hear what they have to say about abortion. I'm sure it'll be interesting. Enlightening, too. But